Johnny, you can hear me.
Yes, we
oh,
can
thank
now.
you so much.
Yes.
Sorry about
I don't know if I was somehow I was muted. Sorry about that, folks. 2:03 p.m. Eastern time anyway. Good afternoon to you all. Good morning to some of our team here. Thank you for joining office hours for Generate version 11.2. We're so excited that you're here. Thank you for giving me the feedback, helping me make sure that I'm heard in the chat. Welcome to version 11.2 office hours. We're joined today by Johnny Cunningham and Ruth Lett, two ETL developers with the CIID team who are going to be covering some of the important notes on this release. If you joined a little late, I just want to let you know that what you saw on your screen was a marquee that featured our Gitbook Generate documentation resource that we can point you to and we'll feature today in this presentation. We'll provide you a link so that you can make your way there too if you haven't yet. But it's got some great navigation and an AI assistant there to help you answer your questions that you have, that you can get your information out of Generate documentation most efficiently. So we'll learn a little bit more about that later today. But I just wanted to review our agenda briefly. I'm waiting for this slide here. We're going to review the changes that are included in the Generate 11.2 release. We're going to preview Generate 11.3. We'll be taking a look at the Generate release calendar, and we'll have some time for open discussion. And near the end of our session today, we'll point you to a hyperlink for you to provide our usual evaluation feedback, where our external evaluator is going to synthesize your data and provide us with information that we can use to make office hours more useful for you. So thanks again for joining. I'm going to turn it over to Johnny. Johnny?
Hello. Like Dan said, Ruth and I will be presenting today. So first thing, Travis, if you'll advance, we're going to go into the changes for 11.2. First off, on the special education files. So for child count, we had, it's 2 bullets here. I think it was 4 or 5 tickets, actually. 2 of those were UI related, where we had, one of them was creating a duplication of LEA names in the drop-down list. And then I think the other was on the, when you pulled your results, when you first pull the first set of results, it defaults to the SEA level and says SEA name and SEA organization ID. But when you switch to LEA in school, it didn't change the header. So we updated those. Those are very minor changes. And then after the changes for 11, we went back and reviewed all of our staging to RDS code and our report logic. And we were able to find a couple of places where we could improve the migration speed of the staging to RDS code for 002. So we made that more efficient. And then I think the last change that impacts child count and actually all of the special education files, I think we listed it under child count if you look in the release notes later. But the dependency on disability type, there were places in the code downstream where you it required you to have disability type, and we have some states that have conditions where that's not feasible. So we removed that dependency, so it will still migrate data through and appropriately create report level data, the aggregations. And then for staff, it was almost entirely metadata related because there were a couple of permitted values that changed. They changed the school year permitted values to match the changes that were made to child count last year. So we made those changes. There was one permitted, or there's one category that was retired, replaced by a new one. So that change was implemented. And then there was one logic change, which is the third bullet there, for staff members that had multiple districts. So we refined that logic to make that work more efficiently. And then discipline for 005 and 007, this sort of 2 companion files. For 007, it takes students that were removed by hearing officer and then removed for the disciplinary, the REM-DW. But 005 is only supposed to include 005 is only supposed to include the REM-DW removals, and we didn't explicitly have that in our code. It was doing it, but we explicitly added that to make sure there was no gap in that logic. And then for directory, again, it was a UI issue where some things were displaying incorrectly in the UI. It wasn't impacting any of the reports, any of the aggregations, any of that stuff. It was just a UI issue. Does anybody have any questions about any of those? Sorry, Travis, snuck that one in on you. Does anybody have any questions about the changes to the special education files before we move on to the others? Just trying to leave a gap for people that type as slow as I do. Okay, so for the non-special education files, for membership, we had an error producing the SCA submission file just because of the size of that, the amount of data that comes through there. So we had to work on some ways to refine how we pull that data in, create all, like accumulate all of that data and then produce it. So 52 is now more efficient. It still takes a little bit of time when you're producing the school level file, but it produces a file with no errors. And then discipline 86 was, again, there was a category change. So we implemented the category change. And then two new sets of files that we're working on for this round is graduates completers, so FS040, and dropout FS032. So we actually just refined the migrations for those, and actually, you know, we already had the staging to RDS code in place for those, but we actually started migrating data through and testing those. We didn't list them here. We also have nightly tests that we run. And then, so every night tests run against every file that we've created these tests against, which I think now is 30 files or so, something in that range. And so then every night as we make our code changes, like for 11.2, as we're making our code changes and testing those and implementing those on a daily basis, the tests run overnight and it verifies our new code changes against the test to make sure we haven't impacted. So throughout the course of this, we also had a few instances where the tests pointed out some things. And then occasionally we have, because our data is created, we have a tool called Hydrate, if you've ever heard us reference it before, or if I say Hydrate, that's what I'm talking about. We have a tool that creates our test data for us. So we can create up to, I think we've created up to 1 million. We don't typically do 1 million students, but it can create any number of students, and then it randomly distributes data across the different pieces of information that we need, depending on the files that we're trying to run. So another thing that also where these nice nightly tests benefit us is occasionally it will come up with a combination of data across one student that we had never had before. We'd never hit in a state, we'd never hit in our test data before. So that stresses our tests. And then we can refine our tests, make them better, make sure we plug any holes in logic. So we had a few occurrences of that. It's not listed on the slide, but we had a few occurrences where our nightly tests caught something and we worked on those too. I think the last one, go ahead, Travis, is user interface, which there was none, other than the couple of cleanup things that I mentioned above, but those were file specific. So I put those in that group instead of here. We didn't make any improvements or modifications to the UI in this release. So there's no difference in how it performs or how it looks. Okay, so general changes that don't apply to file specifications and aren't specific to the UI. So with version 11, so if we go back a couple of versions, you know, that was a fairly significant update, and we updated a lot of the naming conventions, a lot of the column names to align ourselves with CEDS version 11, so that Generate and CDS were back in alignment, fully in alignment. So one of the other things we did is we took the script, the staging to RDS scripts that move the data from staging into the fact and dimension table. So now we have one for every one of the generate fact types or the generate domains that we process data in. So what we did in this round is we actually changed the wrapper scripts to match those so that they line up. This is more just to make it a little more intuitive, make it a little easier for anyone doing ETL development, anyone doing debugging work, because now the wrapper script has the same name. So staging to RDS child count. The wrapper is also called, I think it's migrate data child count, right? So whatever they now line up. So graduates, completers, some of those new ones that you might, some states might be getting into. So graduates, completers, and homeless and immigrant, those things now line up. So the wrapper is in alignment with the staging to RDS script. So that should make it a little easier as you're working your way through new ETL. The second thing is we updated the file comparison utility. It was created prior to version 11, so we needed to make some updates to it because of the V11 changes. And then this is another opportunity, like Dan mentioned, and I want to give a shout out to Travis for that cool presentation at the beginning of the Gitbook utility. But here's another link for that documentation. So really quick, just so if you haven't visited Gitbook yet, or if we say Gitbook and maybe that didn't translate to that's the generate documentation when we've been referencing it. All of the previous documentation that we had, a lot of it was PDFs. We had some Word documents, things like that. We've taken all of that and poured it into Gitbook. So now all of that data is available there, and we're going in and refining it because some of it needs to be updated, cleaned up. And Travis and another member of our team, Gina, and Ruth, have done a ton of work on cleaning that up and making the presentation in Gitbook a lot easier to navigate, linking things together instead of like, where if you had one PDF document that referenced another PDF, you had to, jump between documents, things like that. So Gitbook's a lot easier to navigate. So if you have a chance, go out and take a look at it. But the link here is specifically to the utilities page in Gitbook. So you've heard us talk about them in the past. If you want to know about any of the utilities, how they work, we have a page in Gitbook and there's a specific link for each of the utilities. So you can go in and see any information we have, documentation on how to use the utility. Some of them actually have links to where we've demoed them in previous office hours. So hopefully you can get everything you need there. And then I'm going to give one more plug because I do it in every single one, and I'm going to do it as long as I have to do office hours. I'm going to do it in every single one. We have the staging validation code, which you can run after you've migrated your data into staging, and this is for any of your ETL that you're working on. And it run a set of rules basically that we've predefined and just tests your data that's coming into staging, looking for gaps, looking for known issues that could potentially cause a problem downstream. And we're consistently adding to these. So I would say if you haven't used Gitbook yet, that might be an opportunity. Go out to Gitbook, look at the staging validation utility, kind of get a feel for that, and maybe use it as you're working on your ETL. We'd love to hear feedback on that and additional rules if you can think of things that would be good for us to test at that level. And then lastly for this slide anyway, we added some additional debug views, which Ruth is going to go in and actually give you a more in-depth demo of. So I'll turn it over to Ruth at this point.
Great. Okay, so I am actually going to share my screen in just a second. For any of you ETL developers out there that want to bring up some of these debug views in your local environment, you're welcome to do that. Or, obviously we capture all of these office hours presentations, so you can go back to the recording and do that along with the recording at a later time if you so choose. So this is just my sandbox local environment. in the 11.2 release, there are going to be a bunch of new debug views. So if you're looking at your generate database right now, you are going to see a handful of these in here already, like child count already exists. But in this release, we added new views for directory, assessment, membership, homeless, and immigrants. So it's a fair number of new views. So if you're trying to find them on your generate database, what you're going to do is you're going to open this up, you're going to go under views, and then there's a chunk of them that are under the debug schema. And the way that they're structured is typically they're going to be labeled by a data domain, so assessment, child count, directory, etc. And then there's usually a staging version and a fact table version. So I'm actually going to flip over really quick to the Gitbook documentation just to show you what I mean by this. So if you go into the developer guide section and into the implementation page, there's this handy dandy sort of view of how data migrations flow through the generate database. So if you're looking at data in the staging environment, that's going to be this yellow sort of part of the database. And then if you are looking at something that's labeled fact table, that's going to be pointed at this green layer. And the reason that I mention that is the way that these debug views typically get used on our generate technical team is we use them to help state teams do troubleshooting and data migration testing. So if you have gone through your data migration process and you migrated data into the staging environment, you might pull up one of these like staging child count views to look at the data. Likewise, if you've gotten your data all the way here and you want to take a look at it, you might use one of the fact table views. So I'm going to pull open a handful of things just to show you. So one way that teams can use these is to just straight up query the debug view. So the way that you would do that is you would just right click on the view and you would say like select top 1000, and then you've got a query that would look something like this. This is all test data in our environment, so none of it's real, but it'll give you a sense of like what that view would look like if you queried it that way. Most often the way that our team tends to use these when we're troubleshooting with the state teams, when we're doing implementation work, so we'll actually like crack open the view and make some modifications to it. So if you're at all concerned about potentially changing one of these views, which we don't want you to do, we want them to be kind of clean and just sitting on the database available for use. The way that you can be sure that you're not going to accidentally do that is to script and create to. Because if I try to create this view and it already exists, SQL Server Management Studio is going to be really nice and handy dandy and tell me you can't do that. There's already an object that exists. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to flip over here where I already have something open. So one of the things that I think is really helpful about looking at it this way, I'm just going to take out the create part of this because I don't want to create a new one. I just want to use it to query. Is if you're not already deeply familiar with the way that the data is joined, this gives you a view of how to do that correctly. So you're going to see the structure is almost always in the RDS view of it, the report data store view of it. The fact table comes first, and then you join to these other subsequent dimension tables in order to get your various other data pieces. So that you're not going to have to build that out yourself. You can go into these views to understand how to correctly join fact and dimension tables to each other, or if you're looking at a staging version of it, how to correctly join the staging tables to each other in order to get the information that you need. Another thing that's really useful about this is that it eliminates a lot of unnecessary stuff. I'm actually going to open the child count view because I think this is a much easier way to see that. Because the directory data, there's a lot of that information. But if you are looking at this, you'll see that, you know, we're joining to a bunch of dimension tables, like for LEAs or for schools. And these tables might have, you know, 30 fields in them. But what's in here is going to be focused on what you need for a child count report. So when you're doing troubleshooting for, say, you know, the child count school file or for the early childhood file, you can be pretty sure that you've got everything that you need here and you're not pulling in a bunch of extra fields and information that aren't really relevant to what you're troubleshooting at that particular point in time. And then let's see. The other thing I wanted to show you just very briefly is this is what a staging version looks like. So I was walking through the fact to dimension. The staging structure is more flattened to allow you to pull in information in a much more workable way when you're dealing with pulling information from the source system. You might not want as much referential integrity stuff in place there. So you could work with the data and make it be what you need it to be before it starts flowing into the generate database. So this is what the staging structure looks like. Yeah, okay. So if we can flip back over to the regular slide deck, I think that's what I wanted to show for the debug views. Do the data elements needed for child count match what is in the ETL checklist? Yeah, they should. Almost everything that exists in these debug views should line up to something that you have in the ETL checklist. So not every element that you need in staging is necessarily something that you need in the report layer. So you might see like you have an element that exists in staging, but it's not flowing through to the report layer. But that should line up with the notations you see in the ETL checklist if that happens. Yeah, and if you see anything different, please let us know.
Okay. Really quick, the one qualifier I was going to add is occasionally, like, there will be fields we need that do not flow through, but we use them for processing. Like, for instance, we need the dates. We may not have the dates in the view. Sometimes we have them in there, sometimes we don't. But, we need the dates for validation purposes, but obviously dates don't carry on, things like that. We put some of the additional student information in there to make it easier. Like we put the one that Ruth was showing that popped into my head just a second ago. We put in the name of the school in the view because we figure if you're pulling it up, the identifier with the name helps you quickly identify, but the name is obviously not used in the file. So the view might have slight differences where we were trying to make it a little more useful, hopefully. But yeah, if you see anything in there, like Liz and Ruth said, if you see anything that where you think the view could be more efficient, or if we missed something, absolutely let us know. We can correct that.
Yeah, the other thing you guys might have noticed when I was demoing is that there's a section down at the bottom that has a bunch of like commented out where clauses. And those are things that our development team uses all the time when we're using these debugging views that are helpful. We want to look at this one student. So we've got student identifier, for example. But if you're using these views and you find that you are repeatedly adding in a where clause that isn't in the view, like let us know that too, and we would be happy to put it in so other people can make use of that. Okay, so what's coming next for version 11.3? So this is Generate is aligned to EDFacts file specifications. So this release is going to be tied to any of the changes or enhancements that we need for the files that are due in May through the end of the school year. And with the EDFacts modernization, a lot of you probably already know that a lot of the timelines have shifted. So if you're not sure which files would be included in this or when they're due, you can always check the data submission organizer or work with your EDFacts coordinator to figure that out. But just briefly, this should include files like child count, membership, and I think free and reduced price lunch. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Johnny. And then we're really hoping that in this release that we are going to be able to include a single screen migration feature. So if you're used to going into the Generate database and migrating data, when you get to that ETL page for the data store, right now it has 3 buttons in it. There's a staging, there's a RDS, and like a report button. And this would consolidate that to make it a lot easier and more streamlined. So we're hoping that that will come in the 11.3 release, but if not, we'll tell you guys more about how that's going in the next office hours probably. And then we're always working on product development, looking for ways we can improve tools. So there's almost certainly going to be future tool enhancements available in 11.3. And then Johnny already covered this staging validation rules thing, but every release of Generate includes some expansion of staging validation. So as we do work with the states, we uncover new cases, new business rules, new things that we want to use to improve and enhance our staging validation and testing work. So that is a way that we get a lot out of collaborating with you guys. So there will almost always be new staging validation rules. And if you have questions about how to find those things, you can always let us know. And there's also, I think on the next screen, we can talk about Gitbook documentation. But there is a Gitbook documentation section that talks about that staging validation thing that Johnny, I think, walked through a little bit earlier. And I think the release calendar is somebody else. All right.
Thanks, Ruth. So I don't think, I know this is a newer image. I don't think all of you have seen it. If not any of you, I'm not sure. I know we showed it on a separate meeting. I don't know if it's been loaded to our website yet, but this is our newest release calendar. We got feedback from you all over the past several months, just trying to ask, trying to see something that's a little bit more straightforward. It's a little bit easier to understand, and then also kind of planning out the timeline in terms of when we're trying to release. Thanks, Robin. And what will be included within those releases. So we have created this image. So as you can see, we, as you all know, we released 11.1 in September. We're planning in the next week or so to release 11.2, and then the release after that will be February. You can see we're trying to put things out as best as possible from 5 to 6 weeks before it opens, like the submission window opens within EdPass. So that's what we're targeting. Obviously, as the community knows, there could be, a week or two, that we're late for whatever reason, additional testing or instances like that. But that's the target we're trying to hit. So anywhere from 5 to 6 weeks to the submission window. I'm trying to think. Any questions or comments about this? Okay. Travis, can you go to the next slide? So opening it up for questions, QA, comments from the group. Okay. Feel free to add anything into the chat as we talk for the next few minutes, or just, if you can unmute yourselves, anything like that. Also, if something pops up that you haven't thought about or something, comes to you in a few hours, you can always reach out to us and we can answer any questions that you have about the upcoming release as well. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so this is our evaluation. I know Dan mentioned it just a minute ago. As you all know, if you could just take a few minutes to submit any responses, it's really helpful for us to have this information. You all know from joining these sessions that we actually use the feedback in terms of making edits to this meeting. So again, your feedback is really helpful to our planning of these sessions. So it just takes a few minutes to complete it. And it's, like I said, something that we actually use the data for. So really appreciate it if you are able to complete this for us. And Travis just threw the link into the chat. Thank you, Travis.
Thanks, Liz.
Okay.
This is just Dan. Just want to reemphasize that we really value the input that you provide to us on these evaluation surveys. We work with our external evaluator in order to sort of put a layer for you to express yourself about how useful and in what regard these are useful to you. So our external evaluator does the synthesis so that your responses are anonymous to us. We're not understanding what you yourself provided, but we do get a synthesis of it to try to improve the service for the whole team here. So thanks again for completing the 2-minute survey today. I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions. Like, Liz said, thanks again. You're welcome to come off mute and or type your question into the chat. Any questions out there?
Hi, this is Catherine from Nevada. I just had you estimate that you're going to release version 12 for child count in June. Anyway, you can get that out a little sooner. The due date is in July for child count. And I'm just wondering if that can come out. I don't know what June is. June is 30 days. June 1st, June 30th.
So we'll take a look at that, Catherine.
Yeah.
I'll discuss with our internal team and see if we can push that out any sooner. Sometimes it just depends on what we're trying to get done, the amount of work, all of the different pieces, but we'll for sure take that back to the team and provide updates on that as well. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I've also just I'm in the IDA world, but I noticed that the fall 24, winter 24, those would be all school year 23-24 files. And you have them listed as the 22-23.
You mean in the graphic there?
Let's see. Yeah,
Catherine?
right. Mm-hmm. I have to wrap my head around all those pieces too. Yeah, so summer 24 will be the 23-24 child count. I'm posting this little graphic to my wall because so everybody knows. That's why I was like, oh wait. It's a great graphic. I really like it.
Good, I'm glad. Emily just put in there, it's supposed to be August of 2024. I'm double checking for child count. Yeah, that's what it says there right now. I don't know if it's been updated or changed, but we'll take a look at that, Catherine, either way and keep you posted. Robin is asking to go back to the release slide.
And just so you know, you were not wrong. I just updated it while you were saying. So I changed the years just now.
Thanks, Travis.
Thanks, Travis.
Does that look more accurate, Catherine, after he made those edits?
Just the child count will also be current school year, which we're in 23-24. I am with you. The dates are mind-boggling to me, since especially we're in doing assessments from last school year, which was this current calendar year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there you go.
Perfect. Thank you for catching that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or anything on your mind? Thank you for those updates and that feedback. Just quick show of hands. I wonder if anyone's navigated over to the documentation.
Did you put the link, the Gitbook link in the chat?
Yeah, we can get it there. Thanks, Ruth.
Oh, awesome.
You're welcome. I copied it directly from the slide and it kept all of the format.
Oh, there you go.
No one's gonna miss that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, if you haven't visited the documentation page, I highly recommend it. After you participate in today's evaluation survey, spend some time over there. Check out the new AI tool to help you navigate the site. It's got all your developer guides, your user guides, and your release notes there. The release notes will be there. And yeah, let us know what you think, how it can be more useful to you. I don't think there are any more questions that I can see. Check one time with the presenter team. Anything else that you guys like to cover today?
I don't have anything.
All right. Well, the team here at Generate wishes you a happy holiday season, safe celebrations, and be in touch. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all.